Hi, everyone. This is Matt with ESI Survival Guide. We are an online resource to help legal professionals navigate the electronic wilderness. And I cannot be more excited to welcome our guest, Louis Cohen, today. Louis, how you doing?
Doing great, man. Good to be with you.
Very, very cool. And Louis, here's why I'm so excited about this session. So normally I have lawyers, professionals in privacy, professionals in eDiscovery, things that I know really well. And my guests, I've been lucky enough to have folks that their level of knowledge and experience is way, way, way up here, but it's a wheelhouse I understand. Today, we are, at least for me, navigating some seriously uncharted waters. And I use the metaphor of the wilderness when I talk about this. This is truly going into the wilderness for me, but I'm so excited because I've really tried to jump into this NFT world. For those of you out there, just to let you know, before we even started recording, I was telling Louis some of my woes of trying to buy an NFT on OpenSea, which is one of the largest trading platforms for NFTs, but we're going to jump into this. So today we're going to be talking about NFTs for lawyers, what's going on with this whole ecosystem that is the NFT. But before we jump in, let me just give the disclaimer. All of the content we talk about here today is for general informational purposes only. None of this is meant to be legal advice, and the opinions, the comments, the statements that we all express are our opinions and views only, not necessarily reflecting the opinions or views of our respective employers, our colleagues, our friends, our family, or even each other. So, and with that, I also want to say that if you do like the video, feel free to subscribe to the ESI Survival Guide YouTube channel, hit that like button, and maybe drop us a comment. You know, what are your thoughts about NFTs? Have you bought an NFT? Have you jumped into this crazy, crazy world that we're going to be talking about? And also, if you would like to join us on other social media, you can find us at Twitter at eDiscovery Guide or on Instagram as ESI Survival Guide. And with that, I am super, super, super happy to introduce our guest, Louis Cohen. Louis, you are the founder of DLX Law. And one of the things I want to say, this is a law firm that is really focused on blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, all these issues related to what people call the new economy, if you will. Your tagline really does describe the firm, a new kind of firm for a new kind of economy. And when you look through your bio, it's really interesting to see how you've developed in this space. Most notably, what I want to highlight, because I had Ariana Tadler on, who's a Band 1 lawyer. I'm lucky enough to have my second Band 1 lawyer on here, so I know how big that is. But you were selected as a Band 1 lawyer by Chambers and Partners recently in the blockchain space. So top 3 on the planet. And when I was thinking about this, I was like, so essentially you're on the crypto blockchain distributed ledger Mount Rushmore, but it's actually even better than that because there's only 3 in the band, right?
So, well, I think actually there was 3 in whichever 2 years ago. So I've been blessed to be on that list since the inception. I think there are now 4. Because I'm looking at the website, and all of whom I feel very honored to be in their company, because it's those are a bunch of great lawyers. You can go on the Chambers website and find that. You put a link in there, but I think we're technically up to 4 in that band.
One of the things I want to ask you, Louis, is how did you identify that this was going to be such a big practice area, new domain? Because you got involved in counseling clients on blockchain technology and the crypto space. I mean, I don't even want to use the word early, kind of at its inception. How did you identify this as a place you wanted to be practicing in?
Well, I threw the I Ching, and I found that really helped. No, I did not throw the I Ching, but the I Ching's great. When in doubt, just get those sticks and see what you can learn. I've made most, Matt, of the important decisions in my life really by instinct. I started my career out in law at a very traditional Wall Street firm, and early on, the London-based firms started coming into the U.S., and I said, I like that idea. It's a good idea. I'm going to go with that. I was one of the very first, U.S. lawyers to join one of the London-based firms. And throughout, I've kind of like, well, like if something feels like a good idea, I often call like the peanut butter and chocolate moment. Like, that works. That's
Yeah.
good. So with blockchain, and in fairness, I would say, Matt, that there are a small number of lawyers, but they're important lawyers and they're fantastic lawyers. Many of them are my friends who really, really were at the very ground floor. But it's important to understand the very ground floor of this space was really just Bitcoin. That's all there was, because there wasn't, until around the time I was getting involved, anything meaningful in the space other than Bitcoin. So people, and I think this is relevant from a legal point of view, the people first attracted to it were very much coming at this from an intellectual property point of view. They were tech lawyers. They were people who really were looking at this primarily, sometimes privacy, right? Because privacy was very important around this, things like that. There were people doing money transmission and financial regulatory law. There really weren't, especially when I got involved, and even today, people coming at the space from the point of view of capital markets, corporate finance, things like that. And so in 2015, when I kind of first got exposed to this, I was a member of the board of the Trade Association for the Structured Finance Industry. And I was sitting around and I raised my hand. I said, I think this blockchain thing is bigger than just about Bitcoin or anything like that. I think it's a much more relevant thing. And I was very fortunate. A lovely man named Richard Johns, who was his executive director at the time, said, well, you know what, Lewis, you're going to head our task force. And then once I had a job, it was like a kid with a lemonade stand. I was like, all of a sudden, that's my thing. And like, come over here and get you what? You want the one with the strawberry or just regular? Sugar, and I was like pitching it. I was proselytizing, and I went around and I went around to all, I worked still was at a very large law firm, right? So we had traditional corporate clients, many financial institutions, large corporate issuers, bond issuers, all kinds of folks like that. And when I talked about it, I was really enthused, and they got enthused and excited. And then they started like looking at their watch. And so I realized, just to connect the dots here, is that it wasn't going to work in a large law firm, and it wasn't going to work with those kind of clients. And that was like that key insight moment.
It must have been a challenge, because I know that, even from working in eDiscovery since 2008, when you tried to talk about eDiscovery on a grander scale in those days, usually you would get some sideways glances and people wanted to write you off and that it wasn't a thing. It was a fad almost. And I imagine, some people still look at crypto that way. Did you experience any difficulty in terms of people to take it seriously at the outset, and then momentum picked up?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first pitched the idea of having a blockchain practice group at the large firm I was at, the firm's managing partner said, oh, we already got that. We got FinTech. It's not FinTech. It's different from FinTech. And, so it was, but we did, to the firm's credit, they did create a group. I did lead the group, but, I could see it was pulling teeth. I think a signal moment for me came when we were doing business planning at the large firm. And I was asked, well, Lewis, how do you see this fitting in with the firm's major, kind of core client base? And I said, well, my vision is we're going to create a new core client base. This is going to be, this next generation of entities is going to be our next generation of core clients. That's what I want to do here. They're like, yeah. Anyway, so they could not, just could not compute that there would be this level of disruption. And I think, now when we start to see people like OpenSea, as you mentioned, doing, hundreds of millions of dollars of business a month, many blockchain businesses well past the unicorn stage at valuations, Coinbase being public, that was just so far beyond anyone's conception in 2015 that it was like you were speaking, like you said, Matt, you were speaking in another language, and people are just, what are you talking about? Why do you want to do that? Go do something productive, right? Do something good with your life.
Well, this is a good lead into to kicking off this initial segment I want to do, which is just kind of establishing the vocabulary. But you said something that made me laugh, because I was having a conversation with somebody that related to this, so it kind of triggered an inside joke. But can you explain? I bet you there's a lot of listeners out there that are like, yeah, why isn't this just a subset of fintech? Why is blockchain and distributed ledger practice different from just your traditional fintech practice? What makes it so different?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a really a core question, right? So fintech is technology applied to the financial sector, fundamentally, right? Now, these may be new businesses, they may be new market entrants. They're a neobank that's just a bank that you deal with on your phone, things like that. But fundamentally, it's businesses built around financial services that utilize technology in a principal or dominant way. That's broadly fintech. With digital assets, you've got a whole bunch of different things, and they all intermix with each other. So you absolutely have new forms of payments, right? So Bitcoin fundamentally was meant to be a new form of electronic cash, right? That was permissionless. So you have payment-related things, but you also have new economic systems or models. For those of you who are interested, on Twitter, I'm NY Crypto Lawyer, and so you could go on my Twitter site. But my pinned tweet for a very long time now has to do with the economist Ronald Coase, longtime University of Chicago economist. And Coase really focused on, why do we have corporate organizations at all? If we're so much believers in markets, if markets are the best allocators of capital resources and services and goods, why do we have these command and control structures that are called corporations? And he posited it was because corporations scale really well, and you need to have, in the traditional world, you needed to have scale to sort of bigger companies usually did better. And you also, when you had disputes, you had to have scale to get those resolved. Blockchain takes that all away, and it creates an incredible level playing field in any business. It's not limited in any way to finance. So when I said it wasn't just fintech, one of the more interesting projects we're working on now is a group that wants to create functionally like a decentralized Disney. So content creation done through a decentralized fashion, where there's not a corporation that's driving the whole thing. Like, that's an incredible, mind, what, of how does that even work? What does that even mean? And we're out at the cutting edge figuring that out. So that's a content business. It's not, a financial business. And I think what we're seeing more and more is these technologies allowing new forms of human economic interaction. And that is my prime kind of level, new forms of human economic interaction. Once you see that, once you get that, then you're like, well, wait a minute, what can't you do?
Right,
And,
right.
it really asks, really new and important questions.
You're touching on the fact of what makes NFTs specifically so unique, because at their very core, or at a first glance, if you will, it seems like, okay, it's just digital art. But when you really unpack this, you really see how it bridges all these different types of practice areas. And I want to talk a little bit real quick about just what people might be seeing out there. I went skiing a couple weekends ago, and I had in the gondola a conversation with like a 15-year-old kid about NFTs. Then when we went out to the restaurant, there was an older couple that we had a conversation with. I mean, it seems to be everywhere. You have the example people probably know of Beeple selling the $60+ million NFT. You have CryptoPunks, which I think was the first collection that went crazy. And now it's just exploding everywhere, where you're seeing it become almost a primary asset in most artists' portfolios, whether they be musicians or visual artists, or any different type of artist. Read recently about Nas actually offering future royalties in 2 of his tracks as NFTs. And that's where it starts to get into this securities realm, which I think is rather interesting.
Well,
but before we go too deep, and I would love for people to comment in the comment section, what are some of the things you're seeing out there? What are people talking about in terms of NFTs in your circles? But Louis, if I can, let's give our listeners some vocabulary, like an NFT vocabulary primer, if you will. So real quick, in one sentence or even less, blockchain.
It is a record-keeping tool that does not depend on any single actor or party to continue and propagate itself.
Cryptocurrency.
Cryptocurrency is a type of record that is maintained through a blockchain ledger system.
Understood. And now, of course, the big star of the show, NFT. At its very core, A, what does it stand for? B, essentially, what is it in a nutshell?
Sure. So it stands for non-fungible token. One of the things that's a little bit of a conundrum is you ask, what is a very succinct definition of cryptocurrency? The problem is this: a cryptocurrency, by use of the word currency, implies that its primary purpose is for payment. Sure. As opposed to something else that is a digital asset whose primary purpose is not payment. A token is something that perhaps could be used for payments or perhaps not. It's simply a unit. So a token is best thought of as a unit. A non-fungible token is a single unit that's distinct from other units. It's completely unique in that regard. So in the physical world, you might say a painting that is just a one-off oil painting is a non-fungible unit. A print might be fungible. There might be 1,000 of them or 100,000 of them. They're all the same to each other. You're all indifferent. You mentioned, Matt, the CryptoPunks. Again, what makes them interesting is there are 10,000 of them, and each is at least modestly different from each of the others, so that they're distinct. Each one is not fungible. They're not three of the same kind. But because it's crypto and it's complicated, it doesn't really end there, because there's the standard that is most commonly used to create non-fungible tokens is known by its moniker ERC 721 or 721. And we don't really have to dive into whys or wherefores of that. But there's another standard that's also quite popular, ERC 1155. There are another number of other standards as well. That's not the end of the standards. But with 1155, you can have something that's sort of kind of fungible. If you could imagine, if you had a blockchain-based video game and you wanted to have people owning a golden sword, but you only wanted to have 100 of them, you could have 100 NFTs that are all golden swords. They're all identical to each other, so they're fungible in that small subset, but they're not fungible with anything else. So it does blur. And of course, there's nothing particularly that stops you, instead of having 100 golden swords, to have 1 billion golden swords. Once you're at 1 billion golden swords, you're kind of back to a regular token or regular digital asset that happens to have a picture associated with it. It all gets a bit through the looking glass as to what you mean. But NFT is a non-fungible token. It's a digital asset, something that a record that resides in a blockchain and is generally, and this is really, really, I'm going to drill down on in a moment, but is generally associated with data that is not on the blockchain. So the art that you most commonly think of, the CryptoPunk, whatever it may be, that is not part of the digital asset itself. So we use this term NFT collectively to refer to two things that are related to each other but distinct. One is a digital asset that is maintained in a blockchain network or ledger. There's a record of it. And I'm already blowing your mind, I can tell. And the second thing, in the most basic case, is let's say a JPEG, a piece of art, and that is maintained not on the blockchain. And if you like, I'll explain why. But those two things together create what we commonly refer to as the NFT. What you own unequivocally is the digital asset record. And let me just drill down what I mean by owning a digital asset. What it means to own a digital asset is you are rightfully the person who has access to or knowledge of a private key, which is just a code, just a number that is associated with a public address, that's like your house address or whatever it may be, but a public address on the network, and you have knowledge of the private key that can give an instruction to the network to say, take this from this location over to that location. That ability to instruct the network what to do with something that's at a public address is ownership. If you are the only person who has that private key and you rightfully hold it, you didn't steal it from someone else. So for example, you would not own something. It's the same principle of law as you might have in anything else. Somebody's on a bus and you're sitting next to them and they're really sloppy and they've got their private key written on a piece of paper, which you can do. And you have your little phone and you go click and you take a picture of it. You're not a rightful, owner of that asset. You may have knowledge of their key, but that was not a rightful knowledge. That's an extrinsic concept. That's not a blockchain-based concept. That's an extrinsic legal concept. You're not an owner. So an owner of an NFT is the person or persons who have knowledge of the private key that can cause the blockchain to transfer that asset. So if you own a CryptoPunk, what does that really mean? It means you have the ability, it's at an address you control, and you have the ability to send it to another address. You can send it to an address you don't control. Why would you do that? Because the person who does control address maybe gives you out something else of value. So you've got, CryptoPunk number 7924, Barbara's got a Maserati. She's like, I'm bored with the damn Maserati. Tell you what, I got the pink sheet right here. You send me your CryptoPunk, I give you the pink sheet. We're all good, right? So that is control. You can, of course, in a more common set of circumstances, you can use your private key to sell that digital asset in a marketplace like OpenSea, which you referenced, or many other marketplaces that exist. But fundamentally, that's what ownership means, is that you have the ability to control that.
So essentially on the blockchain, like let's put it in terms of like a house. I own a house, but what really is on the blockchain is the deed, right? Would that be a good analogy? Like the deed to the house is on the, like the physical house is not on the blockchain. So the NFT
physical house is certainly not on the blockchain. I think it's certainly not a bad analogy. The record, but it's really what's on the blockchain is that unique connection to you and the house. And that, like it says, in the deed is sort of like that. It says, Matt has the house at 125 Smith Street in Upper Wauhegan.
But also the key to facilitate that exchange and to kind of move that around.
What's the knowledge of the key is the only way, because these are bearer assets, right? So if in the absence of the key, and as I think everybody has come to understand, if you lose that private key, you've functionally lost the asset. The asset continues to exist, but you've lost the ability to transfer it. And for all intents and purposes, it's useless to you.
I wonder how many NFTs are just out there in the ether, or the Ethereum, if you will, that are just kind of without a home. So Louis, the artwork itself, the information that makes up the picture, where does that reside? Is that locally on my computer? Is that going to be on a crypto wallet that I put it on? Like, where does the actual stuff that, as far as I'm concerned of what I own, where does that live?
That's a great question. And it varies is the short answer. The reason the artwork or that file does not exist in a blockchain is a blockchain is a very unique record-keeping system, because what it is a ledger, but it's a ledger that repeats its state. So the state of the ledger is just simply, A has this and B has that and cha-cha-cha-cha-cha. It's the state of the ledger. It's like a snapshot, right? And a blockchain repeats that state every so often. In the case of Bitcoin, it repeats its state of the ledger and updates it, of course, every 10 minutes. In Ethereum, it's more like every 15 seconds. In some, it's even faster than that. But basically, the state is getting reset and reset over and over. The same information, but just with whatever changes. It's like almost like every time you edited one letter of a Word document, when you're working on a Word document, you had a new version that was saved, and over and over and over and over and over again. So if you have very light data, it's not that big a deal. But if you have very heavy data, like a file that might be 5 or 10 megabytes, replicating that file over and over and over again makes no sense at all. It's inefficient, it's very expensive. So rather than replicating the file, what an NFT does is it includes a field. And that field is called the URI field. And that resource locator points to a location, exactly as you said, Matt, not on a blockchain, somewhere else. Now, where? Very important question. But it points to that location. And that's what ties the digital asset, or the NFT, to the image or the art or the music or whatever heavy file, much bigger than just a few kilobytes, right? Sure. A heavy file. And it points to that, and it's uniquely connected, typically through what's called a hash, which is like a mathematical fingerprint. You can take any file and kind of reduce it to a single number, and so that connects the two things. Now, where that other file is an interesting question, because one of the things about NFTs that it introduces economically, it's a real question, is you have digital files, let's just say yourself, your family photos. You've got a beautiful young child, right? You've got pictures. How much you back up those pictures is up to you. How much effort you want to put into it. Maybe some you could care less. They're on your phone. You lose your phone, too bad. Some are up in the iCloud. Some are like really precious to you, and maybe you'll go to the step of putting them on a CD-ROM or a disk or some permanent storage mechanism, and you might put them in a safe deposit box. I just really don't. I never want to lose this with my dear grandmother, and I've lost her, and it's so meaningful to me. You decide how important that is and what economic cost and practical cost you want to take to save that, because they're your pictures. You own them, right? Now, let's keep going. Let's say there's a corporate entity that is charged with preserving data. They have their own standards. They don't have like 10 copies in 10 locations around the world because they think that's just too much. It's inefficient. They make their own decisions based on industry standards of how they back up their data, right? So corporate data is backed up. It might be in this location, this server here, and that server there, and they're separated by some distance. And some chief information officer or chief technical officer has to make that decision. How do we back it up? But they are responsible. And if they lose that data, that corporate data, right? They're going to have the consequence of that loss. So they are applying, it's just like you, the amount of economics or cost, that storage that they feel is appropriate under the circumstances. Now let's look at an NFT. What makes an NFT different is the transient ownership. So what's interesting here is you might own a given NFT for, a day, an hour, 10 years. At any given time, you might transfer it. How much you want to invest in backing that up may depend. You may just see it as kind of a flurry, something you do, you send it off to someone else. Who is responsible really for making sure that that file is always in the place you expect it to be? There's not a lot of good answers to this. I'll tell you right now. There's a system called the Interplanetary File System, file storage, IPFS, which is most commonly used. And IPFS is decentralized storage. So anybody can contribute their computers and help store information. The catch is that system has a process by which files get chucked out because there's not a lot of storage available unless somebody pays to ensure that that file is permanent. In IPFS, it's called pinning. And if somebody isn't pinning your file that's associated with they say, oh, don't worry about it, it's an IPFS. And you say, okay, who's going to pay for that? I'm a big believer, Matt, in life. You can go really far if you just ask one question. Who's going to pay for that? That gets you a long way. There's almost any circumstance, you bring home that cute girl from the dance, your mom says, how are you going to pay for that? It's a pretty sage question. So, how the metadata is stored and who's paying for that storage. Because the thing is, we're promising people with NFTs that it's a forever thing. The digital asset is a forever thing, at least as long as the Ethereum blockchain or whichever blockchain it's on is maintained. But the digital asset without the target file is useless to you. Again, it's like a number, like, whoa, big deal. And so this is something that the industry is still working through. There are different solutions. There are some more robust file storage solutions that are decentralized. There's another protocol called Arweave, ARWEAVE, which is designed specifically for decentralized file storage. But with decentralization comes all these interesting economic questions, which is why I brought up the economist Ronald Coase before, that you have to start thinking, everything changes now. Who is responsible? If there's not a company who, oh, it's wonderful, it's decentralized. Well then, okay, how much am I responsible for it? How much are you responsible? What is your Bitcoin? You're super responsible for it because you know that there's a lot of value and you're going to back up your Bitcoin, I hope, very, very well, take a lot of care. With your NFT though, how does that work? You can protect your digital asset, but who's protecting the file? I know there's a lot there, but it's really important to kind of start to wrap your mind around this stuff.
Sure. I have a Coinbase account and I just recently bought a hardware wallet to try and protect that. But no, there is a lot there and this stuff is fascinating. Just the fact that there's the word interplanetary file system is file storage is fantastic.
Yeah.
People that name this stuff, but that's an important distinction too. I learned a lot right then. That I always thought that what sat on the blockchain was essentially the code that made up your artwork, your NFT, but obviously that's not the case. That can exist in two different spaces. It also begs the question about so many traditional legal concepts of custodianship, possession, custody, and control, and also the efficacy of certain legal remedies. For example, if the blockchain is immutable, then I can imagine takedown notices probably don't have much meaning, right? In that context. And we'll get in and talk to that. But let me real quick, Louis, go back. So we have blockchain, we've defined cryptocurrency, NFT, the definition just sends us down a really cool rabbit hole. Smart contract. What does smart contract mean in the context of what we're talking about?
Sure. So when the Bitcoin blockchain was created, it did one thing. It only ever does one thing. It does it really well, which is it keeps track of two numbers. One number is the public address number, and the other number is the number of Bitcoins, technically unspent transaction outputs, or UTXOs, which is really what you've got. But just a second number. So two numbers, that's it. What the breakthrough of Ethereum is said, well, if we're keeping track of things, Why can't we keep track of little computer programs, little bits of code? We can have the network not just keep track of two numbers, but keep track of executable code. And so a smart contract is executable code that's maintained in a blockchain environment. So it's code, but that is maintained on the ledger. And what's critical about that smart contract, that code, is that it will always ever execute exactly the same way on every computer that's connected to that network. So if you're connected to the network and somebody in Japan is connected to the network, and you both run that code, or that code runs is more appropriately to say, you'll see the same output that they see. It's deterministic, and you'll have complete certainty that your outcome is the same as that other person's outcome or anyone else who's interested in it. So it's code. In a normal computer, you can run on your laptop code and it has some output, and I run it and you run it, but we don't know that what we've got is the same. When we're in a blockchain environment, if we deploy a smart contract, or we upload effectively code to this, what's known as the Ethereum virtual machine, which is this virtual computer that's run here, the outputs are always going to be known and the same. So one of the things you can do with a smart contract, there's many things, but one of them is program to create tokens, which are smart tokens in Ethereum is a little bit different than the way Bitcoin works. But in Ethereum, they're simply bits of code that keep track of things. So they might keep track of how many tokens there are and who's associated with them, but they can do other things as well. They can do anything computer code can do. They can add to, subtract, nest with each other. They can have, nested arrangements. They can be addressed by effectively like an API or other tool. It's anything that computer code can do, because they are computer code. That's all they are. Solidity is very similar to JavaScript. It's a computing coding language, and Solidity is the language that smart contracts are written in. So that versatility is, that unlimited versatility is an incredible thing. What makes smart contracts particularly interesting, this was another brilliant development in Ethereum, is that because it is a complete language, a complete scripting language, it can run loops. And in theory, as with any other computer, when your computer gets stuck in a loop, for example, and you get the little wheel of death, you have to restart or hit something. But the Ethereum virtual computer doesn't work. So because it can accommodate loops, and because there's no reset button, the innovation is that there's a cost associated with running that program. And that in Ethereum is known as gas. And you probably heard about that. Oh, there's a gas cost, right?
That's one of my vocabulary words I was going to ask you.
We already one step ahead. Because the gas cost is the price you pay to run a particular smart contract or bit of code. And the complexity of that code or smart contract determines how much gas you pay, because you're consuming the network resources. You're causing the computers to do something, and you have to pay for that consumption of resource.
So the other day, I was taking my first step into staking the cryptocurrency that I have, and I was trying to earn some interest on it, and there was a pretty high fee to stake. Is that fee the gas?
Probably. I mean, the gas is the transaction fee. I'm not sure what protocol you're doing, whatever you were doing, but basically to cause the Ethereum virtual machine, or even other blockchains as well, although the costs tend to be lower for various reasons. But let's just stick with Ethereum, since that's what most people know and use. Sure. Your wallet or your system will determine how much gas it costs to send something somewhere, to do something. And basically just there's a formula for how many cycles and how complex the code is and how congested the network is at the time. So it's a little bit like a variable like charge on the freeway. So like if the freeway is really crowded, there's a lot of traffic, they might, before you get on the freeway, they might say, well, it's not $1, it's $15. How bad do you want to get on the freeway right now, right? Like it's $50. You're really sure you want to go there? By that means, however, you could moderate the traffic and hopefully everybody keeps moving, is the idea. If everybody paid the same thing, people just pile on and everyone would just come to a grinding halt. And the gas is a market solution to the consumption of the compute power of the Ethereum virtual machine.
Who owns the gas stations? Who owns the?
Yeah. That's a great. There is
when I pay a gas fee, like who gets that money?
There are owners, and those are those people who operate nodes in the Ethereum blockchain. So if you want to be part of that, contribute compute resources to the Ethereum network, you can do that. You can run a node, which has a cost to you. There's an electricity cost, there's cooling costs, there's some operating costs, but then you get paid. You get a share of those transaction fees. So you're providing resources to a decentralized network. And the beauty part of an open or permissionless network is that when you want to do it, you can do it. When you like, it's not working out for you for whatever reason. I'm not making enough money. I'm bored. I hate it. This is stupid. I'm going to Hawaii. You take your resources away. The market is ever adjusting to how much resources it has and what the cost of consuming those resources are.
Is that practical? Because I've heard stories about people going to Best Buy and buying up 50 hard drives to do this. But nowadays, I'm assuming that your gas stations are really almost like nation state owners or people who have server farms, or I assume there's just massive.
It depends. It's a great question. It depends. So there are, and Bitcoin mining is sort of its own thing. It's got its own special characteristics. There's very specific hardware that you use for that. Others work a little differently, but their businesses, of course, to facilitate that. So there are companies that if you want to run a node, they'll give you all the tools you need. So they take away going to Best Buy and plugging it in down in your basement. And they just say, basically, you send them some money, they'll run the node for you and provide that as a service. So there are different ways of doing it. You could also split that. You could be part of a pool, for example. So you contribute some capital along with other people, and then somebody will manage that capital, and provide that service. That is probably a securities activity, but that's a different point.
We can easily navigate into crypto. And I know one of the things I learned is that one of the big differences between Bitcoin and Ethereum is that Bitcoin, there's only going to be a certain number ever made, ever mined. Ethereum's a little bit different, but we can touch on that later. But getting to this whole concept of mining, I assume the analogy to NFTs is minting. Can you describe what minting is in the context of an NFT?
Sure. So something has to come from somewhere. So the particular NFT, as we said, is a little bit of code. In the 721 standard, it's about 7 lines of code. It's really, really short. And once that code, which will be associated with a resource off the chain in almost all cases, not in 100% cases, but almost all cases, once that code is deployed to the relevant blockchain, most likely Ethereum, so that's uploaded in effect, then effectively that creates at least one digital asset in the case of an NFT, a single one, and that's associated with a public address you control because you deployed the particular smart contract, and then you can then transfer that. So I make a little doodle and I create an NFT with that doodle. I pay $80 for gas or God knows what it is to deploy my little contract. I've minted that NFT. Now you come along and Matt goes, man, Louis, that's a nice doodle. I'd like to buy that. I'll give you $300 for that or whatever. Then I can sell it to you. And what does that mean to sell it, right? I'm going to send an instruction to the Ethereum virtual machine, and it's going to say, transfer this token, which was created by this particular smart contract, to a public address that Matt controls. Then I don't control it anymore, and you do, and you now have that NFT. But again, notably, the doodle, which resides in a file, perhaps on IPFS, perhaps somewhere else, is never moved anywhere. It's always in the same place, the file, the target. What changed is the person who controls the private key of what points at that file, right? So it's different people may point at the file, but the file never moves anywhere. It never goes anywhere.
And it's funny you mentioned that, Louis, because oddly enough, I am offering ESI Survival Guide doodles as NFTs for the low floor price of $100,000. You can get in on it. But
people are looking at everything, and it's, I personally, obviously there's a lot of it crazy, right? There's tons of crazy in this space, but it's out of crazy. We get brilliance and we get great ideas, and we just have to some of them are dumb, some of them are cool. There you go.
I bought this is the Koala Intelligence Agency. I have no idea why I bought this thing.
But you bought it, it spoke to you for whatever reason.
Kind of, right? I mean, I was trying to get in on the craze that is the Bored Ape Yacht Club, right? Mm-hmm. And this thing, if you've seen it in the news, I know you have, but for our viewers out there, I mean, I think it's the celebrity buy-in that really drove that, which brings me to my first question outside of the vocabulary. The thing that really opened me up about NFTs, that was kind of my eureka moment, where I stopped thinking of it as just, well, it's just a copy of art. Like, why can't I just download the JPEG and I have the same thing? And I know from a technological standpoint, it's very different, like you just went through so eloquently. But what really broke it open for me was the sense of community. This sense of a lot of it is driven by ego and just look what I can buy. I have this $250,000 ape drawing. But it's also the sense of community. It's almost like you see now every NFT that's minted on OpenSea or any collection is so much more than just a piece of art. It's almost like it becomes like your membership card in a club. And you spoke recently on I think it was the Crypto and Blockchain Talk podcast, and you talked about how you were excited about this notion of NFTs bridging the digital space and the physical space, and how artists were creating these physical experiences from NFTs. Can you talk about really how an NFT creates a community, and how are folks using NFTs to actually engage the physical world?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think it's been widely recognized, but I think it's worth noting here that so much of this has been impacted by the pandemic. So many of us are at home alone, and that's led to a lot of things, but a feeling of wanting to be part of something more. When you're sitting in your house day in and day out, the idea of like having a ready community of others who are sharing something with you is pretty meaningful. And people are like reaching out and grasping for that. And it, to some extent, doesn't matter that much. What makes NFTs so powerful for creating that community is that element of digital scarcity. You can know for sure that you're dealing with another bona fide owner. You could go and you look at their public address, and they either have that or they don't have that particular NFT, there. So who the owners are, who the real owners are, and you have that feeling of being in a club. But I think one of the interesting things, particularly that the Bored Ape Yacht Club did, was they encouraged that by the licensing. We haven't talked about licensing, but it's critically important in NFTs. Absolutely. But that there's a relationship between the licensing and the community, because if you can do things, if you have that real sense of ownership. So unlike a CryptoPunk where you just mainly put it as your profile picture and there you go. Well, okay, that was exciting.
That's how I've gained traction, right? I mean, I know Jimmy Fallon, Post Malone, Eminem just bought one. I think they actually minted one that's like an Eminem looking avatar, if you will, or NFT.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like it kind of like really blew up with all the celebrities.
Absolutely. But with the Bored Apes, what they did very cleverly is they had a much more open and flexible license that says if you own the NFT associated with this particular image, right, this character, you could make derivative works from that. So you could take that and create a story, create a movie, create a t-shirt. I think somebody put them on wine, there's like Bored Ape wine, whatever. And so that's really, really interesting. So now we're bringing in commercial activity, economic activity. So it's not just a club of everybody can say, well, look at me, I got a profile picture. But people like we're doing things and engaging, and that's further driving that kind of sense of community, because people are exploring together. What are people interested in? What do they want, with this? And that's kind of driving that. It's also, Matt, takes you into the second point about, the physical world, the real world. As we can see, there are a number of ways that NFTs can relate to the real world, going in different directions. One is the example I just gave, like somebody took one of the Bored Apes and used them as a logo on a wine brand. And wines, it's red in the bottle. Who the hell knows what's going on in there? But people really respond to the label quite a lot. And so taking kind of an iconic image was really interesting. So that takes the NFT and brings it into the real world that way. There's other things going the other way. So there's a cool project called the Proof of Attendance Protocol that awards you an NFT only when you're a specific, location at a specific time. Most obviously, like a concert, God willing, we go to concerts again at some point, right? So you were in this limited geographic space between the hours of 8 p.m. and 12 midnight on January the 14th. You get this NFT that was only ever minted and available for those people, and it's like a ticket stub, but only better because it's really unique. You were there. And there are all kinds of different ways that you can use that. There are games that are being used. Really cool NFT platform called Nifty's just did a huge drop with the Matrix, tied into the the new Matrix movie. But they created a whole slew of Matrix avatars, and they're doing all kinds of really interesting things with the Matrix avatars. There's like all kinds of nearly unlimited kinds of ideas. It's just the biggest piece of white paper ever to kind of start creating on and engaging with. So you can absolutely touch the real world. You can do other things too. You can have NFTs that point to different places depending on the geographic location of the wallet with which it's associated. So if you have this NFT in Sweden, it points over here, and if you have it in Germany, it points over there, and you have it in South Africa, it points over there. So you could do things like that. You could have things that change over time. So like that corrode or erode over time. So it loses like 1 pixel every, it's programmed to lose 1 pixel every 10 seconds, and it's sort of like fading away.
The ephemeral NFT.
Yeah, the ephemeral. Just like all kinds of things. You're limited by, only your creativity. And I think that's been very, very attractive to people, that new kind of design space, combined with the idea of community, as you said, status, which you noted, and unequivocal. It's often remarked, these are Veblen goods, right? The demand goes up as the price goes up. It's not what you would expect. If the more expensive it is, the more people desire it, like a Rolex watch or what have you. So you've got all these different things kind of all playing out here.
I like this notion too. I didn't think about when I was asking my question about the physical space, about it going the other way. So for example, I was thinking about, okay, you have Kings of Leon that I think released some tracks or something connected to their new album was NFTs, where certain bidders or people that get the NFT, they get 4 front row tickets to like one show from every tour for the rest of time, or something amazing like that. But I didn't think about it almost like, I run marathons. So at the end of the marathon, you get a medal, and the medal is something you show people to be like, hey, I did this. Now you only really have it on you the day of the marathon, maybe the next day. If you're wearing it around like a year later, people might laugh at you. But this whole notion of an NFT being a certificate of an accomplishment or marking something you did or some kind of cultural event you were a part of, I think is also really, really interesting. I also like the notion of a lot of artists using it as a way to further express themselves. So you have, there was one hip hop artist that I saw that she had released an NFT that was like a play she wrote, right? There's different artists that might use that to take song snippets or maybe throwaway tracks they would never release on an EP or full length. And they put it on, I'm dating myself, a full length, and actually put that on as an NFT. So this is really, really interesting. But you said before, you talked about one of the interesting things with the Bored Ape Yacht Club is that it gave an owner the right to make derivative works. As soon as I hear that word, I'm thinking copyright law, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the other bundle of rights that's in copyright law, whether it's public performance or display or reproduction. So now let's go the other way. So if I'm an NFT owner and I mint an NFT, can I carve out specific rights that I keep? So for example, if I sell you my, instead of the Bored Ape Yacht Club, it's like the Excited Monkey Car Group, right? Now you can't put it on a t-shirt. And if you do, I could sue you or you got to pay me. Is that something that you're seeing that's happening as well?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the vast majority of NFTs are subject to licenses, whether you read them or not. And generally, and rather dishearteningly, those licenses are very limited, exactly as you say, Matt. So usually the only rights that you receive with respect to whatever that target metadata is, the image, the video, the music, whatever it may be, the only rights you receive is just the ability to display or perform by means of music is a little bit different. So not necessarily broadcast, but like if just keeping with visual, the only right you have is to display that work in a non-commercial way. So you can't monetize it. You can't do anything. Basically, you get to show people, hey, look at this. That's me, more or less use it as your profile picture, display it for non-commercial purposes. You cannot do that. So there is a license associated with virtually every NFT. And that license, if you violate it, at least in theory, would, allow the rights owner to go against you. Now, again, as a practical matter, that's, it's difficult. And you asked about takedowns, and that's its own interesting, question. There was recently an example, which was on, somebody posted on Twitter, some bunch of wiseacres, as we like to say, wiseacre, created an NFT series around the Olive Garden, because, we're all family, except the Olive Garden did. Except the Darden restaurants who owns the Olive Garden brand, they didn't think, well, we're all family except for you, and you're not family. You're we don't like you. And so they did not like the idea of riffing on their trademarks. And there's good reasons for that. I mean, I don't mean to disparage, but they were not.
Breadsticks are amazing. I don't care what anybody
But
says.
the breadsticks are amazing, and there's that. They, and again, this was made public. They sent a letter to OpenSea and said, we believe that these NFTs are infringing on our trademarks, and we want you to take those down. And they were infringing. And here's the interesting thing for OpenSea. What they did, as best as I understand it, is they took them off their website. So the website that OpenSea maintains is just a private company, private business like any other website, and it points to these various things, and so they can go in there and now can't see these. So it appears that they don't exist, but the NFT and the actual place, and this is why it's really important to understand what I was explaining earlier, right? The NFT points to some location that is out of control, not within the control of OpenSea in almost every case, or anybody else in any case, right? And so the only way you can actually remove it is to find whoever is owning that resource and tell them disassociate it. And that could be difficult or impossible in a lot of ways. And that's why people are exploring decentralized storage now, because the idea is like on Arweave, which I mentioned earlier, you can't do that. There's nobody to write to take that down. It doesn't exist. It's not possible. Now, on the one hand, this feels very empowering, right? But on the other hand, and I discuss this with my clients, we have to remember there's also abhorrent content, and there's a wide variety of abhorrent content. And so these are complicated questions where freedom and liberty and how libertarian you are, many people in the community are very libertarian oriented, say, well, that's the way it goes. We're humans and some are abhorrent, like your Uncle Bob, he's pretty abhorrent, never gonna invite him over for Thanksgiving, but he exists and you can't stop him from existing. And so we get into these difficult questions about what do you do about that content? How do you relate to it, et cetera? And look, on the political side, we saw the firestorm around Twitter and certain political content. Should have been, not allowed? Should it be allowed? How do you deal with all those things? These are very fundamental issues that go way beyond technology, right? But NFT technology really enables you to really start thinking about these questions again. And as lawyers, I personally, if you haven't figured this out already, I think it's the most exciting place to practice. And if you're listening to Matt's show and you're not doing this stuff, man, figure out, get involved, just start to coming into it, because it's just fascinating. It's the most interesting stuff, whichever way you're going.
Buy a Koala Intelligence Agency NFT. So
there you go.
Goes up. But Lewis, I wasn't going to ask this question. I wasn't going to jump into, I didn't even think about the nefarious side of NFTs, but you get me thinking about whether there's a market for these kind of like black market NFTs that might be brands that, there's a takedown notice, but it still exists somewhere and people want these things because they have kind of that danger element to them, or even folks that might include content on an NFT that's not something you want. I mean, could you feasibly buy an NFT that has unlockable content or attached content that you're unaware of?
Absolutely. There are a lot of difficult questions. I mean, there's another recent suit, very recent, I think this week, where Hermès, the luxury goods company, sued someone who did something similar with their Birkin bag, which is very iconic, and they had MetaBerkins or some which thing, for the metaverse, and they sued them, but it's a tangled mess, and they're seeking damages in their lawsuit and other things, but they may not be able to, if that's already been deployed, there may be limits to what they can do. One interesting thing is which has been very sensitive around speech, is 3D printing, right? And so one of the things that's really sensitive is you can have code that would allow you to 3D print a weapon, a gun. And that's very, very, very sensitive issue. Is that speech? Is the code? Can you censor the code? How does this all work? And of course, what if you make that? Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. You're grappling with some of the most challenging and interesting issues. What if that code now is deployed in, an immutable blockchain, and it's just up in a decentralized storage system? You cannot take it down anymore. It's just there. You're right. So, and you could transfer it through the NFT. So a lot of questions, a lot of difficult questions. My personal point of view, Matt, is that trying to pretend these questions aren't there is foolhardy. I think we got to embrace them, understand them, start engaged, and just be the rational, common sense people that we are. And I think as lawyers, we have a huge role to play in this, in helping people think these things through. These are all balancing tests. There's not a single right answer. And as lawyers, we're very comfortable with that. On the one hand, this, on the other hand, that, on the one hand, this, on the other hand, that. And all of these things play out. And that's why I really encourage, lawyers who are intellectually curious to just get involved and start participating.
Well, you're a living example of the fact that obviously traditional law and legal concepts play a role with NFTs and all of this newness, but they're also a little bit out of their league because two of the questions I wanted to talk about was to the extent traditional tort law can play a role with regards to NFTs themselves, and also how tort law and other law gets into the metaverse, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Maybe on even another podcast if we can get to this one. We're already slated to have a 4 or 5 parter with this one. But when it comes to NFT, what would prevent someone from taking my LinkedIn profile picture and minting that as an NFT? Do I have a tort for my likeness? Can I bring a cause of action for that? Whether an IP action or something, or I mean,
so there's I would answer that question in 2 parts. The first part is there's a very standard answer. If somebody, I'll just say, steals property that belongs to you, that could be physical property, that could be intellectual property. If somebody steals property that belongs to you, that is conversion or it's theft, that is, we don't go for that, right? If you can find the person who stole your property, who grabbed that nice diploma off your apartment, like somebody came in to clean the windows and then, wait, where's my diploma? They stole it, right? They stole it. If you have intellectual property similar to that diploma, you have an image that you have, unequivocally good title to the trademark or whatever, and somebody takes that, as in the Olive Garden case, you have rights. You can pursue those rights in court, and you can have, at least in theory, remedies. There's nothing has changed. That's not even, that is just the law as it works today. What this makes different, though, is the practical ability to achieve those remedies. And that's where things get interesting. Because when we talk about censorship resistance, oftentimes when you think of censorship resistance, we think of the kind of censorship we don't like. No, but you can't tell me not to say that. I'm going to say it whether you want to hear it or not. Right? Okay. So people like that. Wow, I can express myself. It's good. Got it off my chest. Great, right? But censorship resistance also can apply to the criminal, right? So what does that mean if you cannot prevent the criminal? So with Bitcoin, for example, firms like Chainalysis, TRM Labs, Elliptic do great work in trying to track stolen Bitcoin. So as we said before, if you have a private key that allows you to control a digital asset, let's just say Bitcoin, and somebody wrongfully gains knowledge of that private key, not through your permission. They hack into your computer. They do something. There's a phishing attack, whatever it may be, and they get wrongfully, there's a SIM swap right on your phone, but they wrongfully gain access to that. They can then transfer that Bitcoin, those UTXOs that I referred to before, to another address, and to another address, and then to another address. And there's somewhat no limit to that. There's sites that are called tumblers that seek to mix all these things up to make it really, really hard to find. But hard is not impossible. And again, some of these forensic firms specialize in that. So when there was that big hack of, I think it was the pipeline company, last year, there was a ransom paid, and that was tracked down. They found that through a variety of means. I think there was some. They probably, I'd be willing to bet that the hackers, the ransomers, just had very bad, OPSEC themselves, and they'd like, well, you stole that, I stole it right back.
The irony,
right? But we're in this new world, right, where all these different dynamics are applicable. So tort law, which is where you started, Matt, still applies. Nothing has changed about it. But the practicalities of how that works do change. And that law is never an abstract. It has to exist in the real world. And when the real world changes, the law has to adapt in some way or another to that.
We'll talk about the real world versus the metaverse in terms of some interesting concepts of law. So are you seeing, I know that one of the big marquee NFT cases was the Roc-A-Fella Records Jay-Z case, where I think his former partner Damon Dash was trying to sell his interest in Reasonable Doubt, Jay-Z's debut record from '96, classic, as an NFT, and the lawsuit sought to block that. I'm wondering, are you seeing, is there an explosion? Could you characterize it as an explosion of NFT jurisprudence and case law? And if so, are there any trends being gleaned? Are courts trying to force these matters into traditional legal concepts? Are the lawyers that are bringing these cases, bringing them under the traditional legal concepts? Or is it kind of a shotgun where there's really no rhyme or reason to how the outcomes of these cases? Is it all over the place?
Yeah, I think particularly the common law that we have here in the US and the UK and for the most part Canada really works well here because it's principles based at the end of the day. And it really doesn't depend so much on the technology. So by odd coincidence, when I was in law school in the 50s or so it feels like, I wrote my law review article about the transition of the synchronization right, if you know, in which is itself an interesting thing, not mentioned in the Copyright Act, the transition when movies moved to video cassettes. And all of a sudden there was this very similar sort of thing, all new cash flow, new whole stream, money was being made, and sync right holders, the music that was incorporated into films, said, hey, we didn't negotiate for video cassettes. I'm sorry, we get new rights. And again, that had to be played out. That was what this was again in the 80s. You know, I wrote about this and I was fascinated by it at the time. We're playing through many of the same things. I think our principles, our legal principles work just fine. Is this a matter of contract? Was the contract clear? What did the contract say? If, you know, this was a matter of infringement, was there an infringement? If so, what were the damages? Can you get jurisdiction over the infringer? You know, all of the standard legal concepts, if you're a lawyer, continue to apply. We're not sort of in some weird, you know, different universe. It's how you apply them. And especially if you're lawyering in the space, you have to know how the technology works in order to really drill into this stuff.
So with that, Louis, I think that's a great place to end this as part one. There's so much that we've talked about. I think this may not even be a 3 or 4 part of this. Might be a running series that we did. If you will indulge me and let me invite you back as a quote unquote, you know, returning panelist, if you will. But if you could, what's one thing that you could leave the ESI Survival Guide listeners and viewers with? What's one takeaway that you'd like to communicate?
You don't think of NFTs in particular or digital assets or cryptocurrencies as something that have limits. To me, this is as important as the printing press. Often I refer to NFTs like it's a piece of paper. What is an NFT? It's whatever you put on it. And you're limited only by your creativity. And we're only just starting to see people figure this out and create all these different things. For me, it's the greatest design space ever. And, you know, so don't think of limits. Open your mind up. It's sort of like, you know, I'm not a big psychedelics person, but if you were a psychedelics person, like just let your mind go and be part of this. Join these communities and have fun engaging with the humanness of what this is all about. This is less about a specific technology and more about enabling people to engage with each other in new and fascinating ways. Just you know, be part of it.
That is, I might have to say, the best survival tip that any of my guests has ever given. That's a goosebump level thing. And again, I love it. That's exactly what, when I started this YouTube channel, the type of conversation that I want to have and the type of message that I want to communicate through this to people. So thank you so much, Louis. I have to say, I learned a ton. If you saw me writing, I was taking notes. I don't think many people take notes during their own podcast, but I was taking notes about new things I want to talk to you about. And it's absolutely fascinating. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I had an absolute blast. I hope you had fun. I hope all of you out there had fun watching this. And if you did, hit that like button and subscribe. Feel free to leave us a comment. And with that, I want to thank my guest, Louis Cohen. Louis, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Matt. Thank you for having me. Really a lot of fun.
And to all of you out there, please, from us to you, stay safe out there in the electronic wilderness. We'll see you next time. Take care.